so simple, so sick, and so clean. Let's break it down. So what we have here is a yellow background. Then we have our usual topographical lines, topographical texture on top of that. That's just faded with a gradient. Put a layer mask on that bad boy, and you just click this gradient, drag it down, and that's how you get that fade out like that. I set to soft light at 50% opacity. Then we have this crack texture that I found. That is what it looks like normally. Set it to linear burn and remove the lightest areas and cut out the crack. That looks great. Looks like the actual texture on the ground is like cracked through. Super nice, super clean. So we added a 23 in the background. That's just tungsten, same text I usually use. All we did there is put a gradient overlay. Another thing I love to do at 68 degrees. Just scale it to where it looks nice to you. Don't want it to be too harsh. So I drop down the opacity to 35% and set that to overlay. That's what it looks like normally at 100%. So it's a black and white gradient set to overlay at 30%. So then we're gonna go put text in there to spice it up a little bit. So I use a different font, and what I did was control click the 23. That gives me the selection of the 23, and then I make a group, put the words in there, select the layer mask, and that cuts out just the 23 for that group. That means those two words just fit in that group. Like this video if you're following along, and comment and tell me you've lost me if I've lost you. So we have a star next, and that is the same sort of effect. Just put that in the top right corner, fill some space, put an inner shadow and a color overlay on top of that, and that's what gives it that indentation look. Then we have our cutout, and then what I did was just paint around his feet a little bit to darken them up and blend them in with the ground. Same thing on the right side, and then just darkened up his shoe a little bit. This one has a radial blur on it that I've painted on certain areas. So if you enable the layer mask, I just brushed it off of his face and like his shoulders, middle of his body. Kind of just left it on the outside edges of his body to give him some motion, like he's like flexing inward, if that makes sense. Then I have another shadow that I painted in just like on the right side of his foot, kind of darken it up. The lighting is coming from this direction more so. I darkened up the side of his foot and just kind of gave it a soft shadow over here. Same thing with this foot and the soft shadow on this side. So now I put another cutout on top of that to make it a little bit cleaner than it was. And the effect on this guy is an inner shadow with the app state gold set to linear dodge add. Those are the settings for it. So then I went in, clicked colorize, set it to the gold, put it at 100% saturation, and then I just painted in a little more yellow glow kind of just all around his body where the light would be hitting him and like sort of the gold would be reflecting off of the background. So then I just darkened up this little piece on his foot because that was kind of bothering me. So just put a black brush over that. And then I just painted in a soft yellow or gold glow over top of him and clicked Alt, dragged these sliders out to make it a little bit more gradual. So that's what it looks like without. That's what it looks like with. Then I just used a black brush and kind of brushed in up here and around this area to make sure that you can't see the skin color of the athlete, and just darken that up with the levels layer. And then we have these lens flares. So I just made some lens flares and put them in right here, right here, right here, and right here. Probably too much at the time. I thought, why not just chuck a bunch of lens flares in there? Did that just kind of like surrounding his face mask where the light was hitting it. You can use a lens flare brush to do that. So then we have a rock blast texture. So these are just floating rocks that I found. As you can see, they are not cut out well, but I knew I was going to be putting a blur on them, so it works out all right. So they are the rock boys. So that was the reason I added in this texture of kind of like a rock exploding, and then just gave it a little trim lighting on the outside with this inner shadow. Then I added on a yellow overlay just very subtly to give it a yellower tint or a more gold tint. And then I added in the logo and made it 3D. And what I did here was I blurred it to give it some motion. So it's a radial blur because it's like, looks like it's like bursting outward toward the camera. And then I just put another logo layer on top of that just to make it clear, because it's hard sometimes to find the balance of like using an effect but also making sure logos and things like that are clear to the viewer. And it's not always as important when it's a personal project, but when it's client work and they want the logo on there, you got to make sure the logo's clear, or they're just going to come back and tell you, hey, can you make the logo clear, or can you make this text clear, or little things like that, little details. So that whole thing has just a gold inner shadow. I use this curves layer just to darken up the athlete a little bit, and that's really it for that. And then I added in the lighting I was using from the top right, and then just the darker brush in the bottom left, as you can see. Then we add in our color effect, which makes the whole thing pop, and the bottom info. So check this next video out if you enjoyed this video. Feel free to subscribe and check out my Patreon for access to my Photoshop files that you can look through and work through with me. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.